Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast and another very special guest. A little bit of a time difference here because as we're recording this, it's late in the afternoon on a Friday, and I know that it's very early over in the UK on a Friday morning. Mr. Mike Lane Evans, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Darren. Yeah, it is just after 7 in the morning, so glad to be here.
It's going to be, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We were talking about just before we press record about whether in fact you've been up as part of the 5 a.m. club, but you said no. But you're looking pretty fresh, mate, for somebody that's up early.
Yeah, well, I made myself get up at 6. Just I've made that mistake before of kind of 10 minutes before a call, and then you sort of look at yourself and go, "Yeah, I mean, you look like you've just rolled out of bed." So
you do know that the Zoom has some filters. You can actually use some filters and soften it a little bit.
Yeah. It looks like an Instagram filter or something that you end up looking like you're sort of some
right.
like influencer just with no wrinkles at all. And no one's going to believe that.
No, they won't. It's like I mean, my kids and my wife use Snapchat all the time, and they're forever putting the filters on. And I mean, it's just whoever came up with that idea is just very, very clever. It's very humorous. But hey, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about something very important today, and that is communication, pitching, presenting, leadership, whole box and dice. Love to get into your background first and foremost. You are the founder and owner of Forefront Coaching Limited. I ask all of my guests, mate, I'd love to know a little bit about your background and what has led you to starting this business and the work that you do today, because for the listeners, it's a very interesting background.
That sort of sets me up there. Let's hope it is interesting. I mean, I basically started life as an actor. I started when I was 8 years old. I grew up in a little country town in the west of England where they didn't even have like a youth theatre program. There was no theatre, in fact, when I first. And I started because my uncle turned 40. My cousin, his son, immediately stole his birthday present, which was a video camera. And we just started making movies every school holiday. And my cousin is now a director of a film company. He's done very well for himself. And I ended up going into acting. So our hobbies very much became our life.
Yeah.
So I did that from the age of 8. And then at some point when I was a teenager, someone told me I could be paid to do it. And I was locked in. I was like, okay, great. This is me for life. But what happened to me in 2016, 2017, for about an 18-month period, things had escalated. I was getting some really high profile auditions, like a bunch of Hollywood type auditions. And I just started failing. I did loads of prep. For those listening thinking, well, you should have worked harder, mate. I did loads of prep and I went in. And what I had achieved in practice, I just wasn't able to achieve in the room. And that goes for 2 areas. It went for my actual performance as an actor, but it also just went for my personality. Like it was just like someone was just sucking the energy out of me. And the way I used to describe it to my mates at the time was, I was like, it's like 60% of myself. I'm hitting this ceiling in the room and I want the other 40%, but it's not there. So at the time I was working with the British military. So I was on the side of acting, I was a consultant, I was a trainer for the British military. And it's a parallel world working with the military. Like lots of similarities, but just different ways of like coming together as a team, as communicating. And so I had learned loads of different communication strategies in that world. And I was able to apply some of them to my own issues that I was having at the time. I did a bunch of research, and there was a psychological study done in the UK, and they found that 83% of people reported a feeling like I was describing, this kind of, I really want to do more. I can't match my intention with my impact. So I did so much on developing that that what happened for me was I was like, I don't enjoy being an actor anymore. And I'm really enjoying all the coaching I'm doing, all the training. I was helping people get up on stages and do TED Talks and things like that. So eventually, by 2020, 2021, I left the acting, fully started working as a coach. I then trained as an International Coaching Federation coach, set up Forefront Coaching last year. And a lot of the work that we do is helping people match or kind of bridge that gap, the
Yeah.
gap that I experienced. They're going, I want to do this, but I'm doing this. And we talk to a lot of salespeople because
Mm.
people are going, well, I'm doing all the things I've been told. I'm doing all the things I've trained for. I'm doing all the things that worked in my old job, but they're not working here. They're not working with these clients. They're not working. I don't know. I just don't get it. And so that gap is something that we help with people a lot.
Nice. And when you talk about the 83% not having the impact they want, so
Yeah.
when you reflect on your own experience, it, I don't know whether it was an out of body experience, but there must have been a level of frustration thinking, I've got more to give here. I'm really good in practice, but why can't I deliver it on the real stage? Was it a case of, because I'd love to delve into communication and pitching and stuff like that, and how many people focus on what to say versus how to say it? Do you think part of that was for you? And is there any backing in the research that talks about how people try to just recite words rather than be a certain version of themselves in that environment? Is there a correlation there?
Not so that last part isn't covered in the research at all. It's more about like these mental barriers that we put in place for ourselves. So I've been asked about this a lot, and outside of that studies, we've kind of studied this as we go through. And so nearly everybody that I've ever met it has experienced this gap in
Yeah.
some form. And that might oftentimes it comes under high pressure environments. So for me,
Mm.
it was those Hollywood auditions.
Yeah.
Um, it might be that massive client that you really want to land.
Yeah.
Um, for startups, it might be that investor that you really want. So
Yeah.
usually comes from that, but the reason for it really varies for the different people. Um, One of the things we see a lot is imposter syndrome, people just feeling like they don't belong there or they don't deserve it,
Yeah.
confidence. Um, but one of the major things, and this was what happened for me, I was relying on my assumptions. So, like, as human beings, as a survival instinct, we've got really good assumptions about things that we can pick up.
Yeah.
But when that high stakes comes in, the nerves kick in, you just can't trust them as much.
Mm.
What I was doing, and this I see this a lot with clients, is I was assuming like
Yeah.
that I understood what they wanted to see. So not
Yeah.
just in terms of performance, but in terms of my personality. So I was trying to be this like really professional, like serious kind of like, I belong here. Like I'm not intimidated by the Hollywood stuff. And the reality was I was coming across as very intimidated and like I very much didn't belong because I was just trying to pretend to be someone I wasn't. And I think in business and especially in sales, we throw the word around a lot, authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think the problem with the word is it's absolutely needed and right. And like if we look back at just what it means, I think it's really, really important. But we see a bunch of podcasts and we see a bunch of like training programs that use the word authenticity.
Mm.
And for a lot of people, depending on where you live in the world, the word authenticity has kind of lost its
Yeah.
meaning.
Yeah.
Whereas I wasn't being myself, is basically what
Yeah.
it means. I wasn't being
Yeah.
authentic. So at some point, people just get this kind of feeling that this gut feeling of going, I don't know what it is about the guy, but I
There's just
just
something about him.
yeah, and there's something about him is that you weren't being yourself. You just weren't actually connecting with another human being. Like we were talking about this before we hit record, right?
Yeah.
Like for the listeners, like Darren was saying how like it's really important on his podcast to just have a conversation, to just no prep of like, oh, we must fit these questions in. We
Mm.
just want to have a conversation. And for the listeners, for the watchers, like you're going to get a lot more out of that because it's just more real
Yeah.
than kind of this formulaic thing. And I think when you go into the sales calls, I mean, God, I've experienced it on the receiving end as a customer. You can feel people going through their script, even if they've memorized it, even if they know it's really well.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I'm just looking at the clock. I'm waiting for you to get through to a point where you breathe so I can just say thanks very much, goodbye.
I want to pick up on a point that because I want to talk about the work that you do and how you help clients because it applies to not just salespeople that this audience is sort of geared to, but pretty much anybody that has to influence, pitch an idea, pitch a product, whatever the case might be. And that is the point of preparation. Because when you're talking about, and we had this conversation earlier, that when we have a fireside chat, and I like to have a fireside chat, but I'm also one of those people that don't want to do too much in-depth preparation from the perspective of thinking about specifically what questions I'm going to ask. I'll have a theme. I'll have an outcome I'm looking for, but my preparation is thinking about who do I need to be in this particular moment so I can be curious, so I can be myself, and then trust that the questions are going to come to me within a framework that I have in relation to what I'm trying to do with this particular podcast. So I want to put that point out there because a lot of people in business are always told, and I've got clients in the sales game that I work with them on their preparation. You've got to be prepared. You've got to know what your outcome's going to be before you go in, but you've got to have some flexibility in real time to say, okay, I need to pivot on the spot, but I want you to maintain your level of realness or authenticity in that process. So just talk to us a little bit about the importance of preparation and how good preparation can allow you to be yourself in a high pressure environment. And maybe it's the experience you had with the Hollywood stuff, right? You would have been prepared,
Yeah.
prepared, prepared, but were you trying too much or too hard to impress? So it was almost like, is there a case of over preparedness?
Yeah, I think preparation is a really interesting thing for us as like coaches and trainers to go and teach to people because I think it is a million things.
Hmm.
And I think that different people need to pick in at different points. And I think it also depends on your level of experience. So for instance, like Darren, you're really experienced in business, but when you first set up a podcast, you can't just then assume, well, I know how to do podcasts because you know about business, you know about sales. But if you've never done a podcast before, you don't know about it. And
That's it.
I think it's really hard for us, like culturally, like I think this is true. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is true in the UK and in Australia, that we're still kind of getting over this hang up of you pick a job and you do that job for life. And so once you're an expert, like you can't be wrong anymore. You kind of got to show face. You got to just, once you reach 40, 50 years old, people are looking up to you. And so you can't screw it up. And
Yeah.
I just think it's BS, man. I think just the biggest thing for me is admitting when you don't know the answer to something. And I really see the effect of that when you go into if I'm running a training day and
Yeah.
someone asks me a question, if I admit where I don't know an answer rather than just trying to blag through it, it really opens up a much stronger conversation. It kind of sets that psychological safety in the room. So people are like, okay, well, he said it. So actually, I'm going to admit this. And some of the best learnings that come out of that session aren't the things that I put into a deck before we went in.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that came out of the moment. So I agree that you've got to be flexible, but I think the problem is, and I've met a lot of clients that do this, and I'll be really honest, like, don't know why I'm saying this, but the majority of these clients tend to be male as well. I don't know why that is,
Okay.
but there is a lot of people that just want to not do the prep because they're like, well, I'm just better working on my feet. I'm just more real. I'm just more me. But an example I can give you from acting, and this to start with, the story is going to feel unrelated. I did a course years ago when I was still very much an actor. And when you go to auditions, the world changed, and a lot of auditions need to just be done on a pre-recorded tape. But a lot of actors struggle because now I've got to be the lighting guy, the sound guy, the director, the producer. I've got to edit the thing afterwards. I'm
Yeah.
also now my own worst critic. So actually, somebody else might have said that was a great take, but I've got to make myself do another 17. Um, so all this stuff kind of comes into play, and it's really difficult. And no one taught you how to do it. No one
Yeah.
taught you how to do all those other things. You're a great actor, but no one had taught you how to do that. So this amazing casting director put this course out, and it was 30 days of self-tapes. So he sends you a script every morning, and by the end of that night, you need to have learnt the script, recorded the tape, edited it, and sent it off for feedback. And then the very next morning, you're getting another one. It's literally 30 days consecutive.
Okay.
But what it did for me, and I use this example a lot with my clients, because what it did for me is my ability to learn a script like that
Yeah.
It's like learning to ride a bike. It doesn't leave you.
Yeah.
I can still, years after doing that course, if I need to learn a pitch or a presentation, if I've got to we try and make our training courses a bit bespoke. So if I've got a whole 2 hours in a day that's changed,
Yeah.
I can figure out what that scripting is pretty
Yeah.
quickly. So yes, I can then go into the room and I can be on work on my feet and I can field all those questions because I've got this kind of area of like I know my shit.
Mm.
Whereas a lot of people kind of see that freestyle and go, well, yeah, I just want to do the freestyle, but you're not really understanding the work that's gone into it, like to get to that point. So yeah, I
Yeah.
might not have done hours and days of prep for this particular meeting.
Yeah.
Years of my life has gone into being able to make sure that I can work on my feet.
Yeah.
Um, and I think newer people in business, or if you've moved jobs or changed roles, that's a mistake I commonly see. It's just going, well, I know what I'm doing, so I don't need to prep.
As you're talking, Mike, I was just reminded. I follow John Maxwell, who is a really really cool, really well-rounded business person around leadership. And he was reciting a time when he just did a keynote address, and this young aspiring speaker came up to him and wanted to get a bit of his time and said, "Oh, John, you've inspired me. I've just decided right now that I want to do what you do." And John's response was fascinating. He said, he was very curious and welcome and thanks for sharing that. And he asked the kid, "So in order for you to do what I do, would you be prepared to do what I've done in order to do what I do?" So he looked very smooth. He knew his content and he could deliver that, but it's the years and years and years of preparation that goes into the ability to look as if you're organically winging it, for want of a better term, on stage, right? And that's the point I want to make in terms of preparation, that you need to be prepared, but there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to give you the confidence to be able to be flexible in the moment. And I often talk in, and I'd love your thoughts on this, being from an acting background, the differences between an A grade actor like a Chris Hemsworth and a B grade actor, which I'm not going to name anybody, but the difference, like from a pure, I guess, academic point of view, a studier of acting and communication, when people can sense the difference, how do you language that in terms of what is the difference? And is it down to things like preparation, or is it down to things like preparation plus who they become in that moment? Do they become the character?
Yeah, so I think for me there are two types of like grade A actors, and they are different, but it's not to say that they can't sort of cross over. But you've got the stars, like the Hollywood stars, and that is a level of like confidence and self-assurance and self-awareness that you don't just like click fingers and like I
Mm,
didn't have that. I didn't grow up in a world. I didn't like have that kind of self-belief and self-confidence as I was growing up. Because you see it with I remember Timothy Chalamet, who's an actor in the newer Star Wars movies. Like I don't know how old he was. He was a kid when he first started doing those movies,
yeah,
and you're like, wow, this guy's a star. Like straight away, there is a level of like self-assurance. Like he's not doing what I was doing and trying to fit in. He's just being himself,
yeah,
and he very much belongs in that world.
yeah,
And he's an incredible actor. So I think you've got the stars, and then you've got the real phenomenal actors where you're just like, oh, like they're the shows or the movies where you're just like maybe some of those actors you don't even know their names.
mm,
Wow, that person. But for some reason you're not inspired to like go like Google them and learn their name necessarily, but you just kind of keep seeing them. And there's an actor, some people know him, some people don't. A guy called Gary Oldman.
yeah,
Um, Gary Oldman is one of the greatest actors of his generation, and loads of people don't know his name
yes,
because every movie he's in, he's completely different again.
yeah,
And so there aren't many people going, like, people often do that thing where they watch a movie, they watch a TV show, and they go, ah, they turn to their wife or their husband and they're like, who's that? Who is that? Like, we've seen them. What have we seen them in? And you do that thing. Whereas Gary Oldman, people don't do that.
No.
because they're not thinking, oh, who is that person? They're just like watching this character on stage, on camera, on screen. Um, and so I think, yeah, I think there are those two different types. And I think to become a Gary Oldman, there is a lot of prep that goes into
Mm.
it. I think even with the stars, there's a lot of prep, but it's not necessarily always conscious prep. It's like usually your parents did a great job, your environment was amazing.
Yeah.
Um, like there was certain things that set you up for success. Whereas those really gritty, incredible actors, they've studied the craft, they've really figured that thing out, and it's not just, oh, I finished my job now. Like a lot of those actors, like acting is their life, and you
Yeah.
meet that in other business as well, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you meet it in sales where they're still talking about sales down the pub with their mates because they just live, eat, and breathe it.
Yeah.
And just like with acting, there are people who are going to be like, dude, just stop talking about, like, we're just, you know, because we overgrandize actors, right? We're like, wow, it's amazing, it's incredible. I About 4 years ago, we went to Nicaragua in Central America, and my wife and I, we've been together at that point about 3, 4 years. And every time we met new people, who'd ask us what we do. My wife's in tech, and uh, they would ask her. I would always let her speak first. It was just me being kind if they asked us as a group, and she'd say she worked in tech, and they'd kind of have maybe a question out of
Hmm.
curiosity, and
Hmm.
then what do you do? Oh, I'm an actor, and then that was it. 20, 30 minutes of questions, and she'd just be like, okay. But when we went to Nicaragua, it was the other way around, and it was the
Oh,
first
really?
time we'd experienced it. And what we discovered is that actors in Nicaragua, they're not revered in the
Mm.
same way that we do culturally in the rest of the world. So over there, baseball players and novelists are
Okay.
the one. They're like, whoa, it's that person. And that's amazing to me because it's
Yeah.
this culture like surrounded by other places, like in Mexico, not far away, like actors are very much revered.
Yeah.
Like, but not, they just don't really care in
Mm.
Nicaragua. And so I think that star status also is dependent on the culture that we're in. So, like, the last thing I'll say on that is I work a lot, I work across like 6 continents. And one of the best lessons that I've learned, and I've had this lesson lots of times, is Black American women challenging me and saying, listen, we're starting from a basis of credibility and reliability, but you don't understand that when I step out there onto a stage, I don't get the immediate credibility and reliability that you
Yeah.
do as a white British
Yeah.
straight guy. Um, and so that's amazing because like there are lots of principles and strategies that we can teach, but also we've got to bear in mind like what kind of world are we stepping into in the first
Yeah.
place. So yeah, I think the A-listers, it depends on that world, whereas the others, there's so much prep and grit
Yeah.
and determination.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. One of the things that I've always noticed, and I kind of make the distinction when it comes to making it applicable for people in their own business,
Yeah,
is you've got to know who you are, you've got to know what your strengths are, what you stand for, what your values are, and stay true to those. And sometimes people say, "Oh, state your truth and all that sort of stuff." Well, that's not necessarily the case, but don't pretend to be somebody that you're not. And I often say to them, if you look at a really great A-grade movie, like a Gary Oldman that's in a movie,
yeah,
you don't actually look at him as Gary Oldman, the actor. You look at him as the character that he is playing. So he actually becomes the character, and you
yeah,
kind of lose who the person is from a naming point of view. And to some degree, Chris Hemsworth in Thor or whatever, the like Extraction and stuff like that, you know intuitively that it's Chris Hemsworth, but he's so engrossed in being the character that you just caught up in the message of the character. So I often talk about the importance of when you with your preparation, you've got to know your topic, got to know your information, but you've almost got to be the character and then trust that you'll be able to deliver the message based on that character,
yeah,
not trying to remember what to say.
yeah. I agree.
So I'd love to talk to you about um, communication. So whether you're in sales, whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a person who's wanting to get some capital to expand your business, or you're working in an organization to try and get money, get increased budget. when you're working with people around communication, because it's all about being crystal clear and doing the preparation, what are some key things that you would work with somebody on as a baseline? Because let's just make an assumption that there are people who don't know where to start,
Yeah.
and they know in their role they're going to have to start to talk to people, they're going to have to start to try and influence people and present to people, whether it be a big audience or a small audience. Where do we start, Mike? What are the foundational blocks that we can put in place that gives us confidence, but also can start to build competence?
Yeah. That's a really great question. So across all the training courses and all the coaching things that we do and whatever kind of bespoke elements we brought in, there's always something that I will bring up in the first probably quarter of a session. And it's the trust equation. Have
Yep.
you ever come across yeah?
The
So
Master's trust equation.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So yeah, David Maister, for listeners, watchers who don't know what we're talking about. So the trust equation for those kind of engineers, developers, mathematicians listening to this, you can go away if your brain works in that way. You can go and do the trust equation. You can figure out what your actual trust score is.
Yep.
When I teach it, when we go through it, it's not about that. I say to people, here's a signpost, go and do that if you want. For
Yep.
me, it's just about the four metrics that
Yep.
they discovered in the study is that there are four key elements to gain somebody's trust. And I just don't, it's a thing that I see people not considering enough. Like you mentioned it already, Darren, like you got to consider your audience. You've got to consider like who you're speaking to and what they want, not just
Mm.
what you want out of the situation. And that's a cardinal sin in sales, in my opinion. Just like going in and saying, I need to get these sales, I need to hit these KPIs. Cool, sure. But to that person, they're not one of your KPIs, right? They have kids at home and they have a budget and they have to justify that budget to their team, or if they're the owner, they have to justify that budget to their loved one at home for
Yeah.
why they just spent £20,000 and or dollars. Um, so so that is a thing that gets forgotten about. And so if you then are going to consider the other human being, then trust is key.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if someone calls you up on a sales call, do you trust this person enough to give them even $10, let
Mm.
alone 20,000? So I love it. I really love the trust equation. I'm not a mathematician brain myself. Like I don't go and do the trust score, but the four key elements in that for your listeners who don't know, we need credibility,
Yep.
reliability, and intimacy in high amounts. And what happens a lot, I mentioned this already with the Black American women, is it's not credibility and reliability are not always easy to come by.
Mm.
What I see in like 95 to 98% of the cases is that people go, yeah, yeah, obviously. Whether they are being rude to me or they're just kind of thinking it, or like probably listeners have already had that thought right now.
Yep.
Some people we understand that you've got to bring credibility and reliability, and we do get people who ask us what do you mean by those two things. And so credibility actually being able to do like that you've got a resume, you've got a CV that comes from a certain place, or a company that you're selling has this background, they have clients, they have traction, they have people that love this stuff.
Yep.
The credibility there, reliability, actually proving out the ROI, the return on investment that you've made for some of those clients. Because yes, we got all these people that have paid for us, but we've retained a bunch of these clients too.
Mm.
And then also just simple things. Don't be late to the call. Like iron your clothes, like even when you're on Zoom. Like because we saw this in 2020 when we all moved online. People just started showing up in a t-shirt, and you're like, would you turn up to that
That's
sales
right.
call in a t-shirt? Like, and now if you're meeting with another startup who's also in a t-shirt, cool. Like,
Yeah.
consider who you're speaking with. But if you are meeting with a banker who you would in face to face, you would all be in suit and full tie.
Yeah.
Then why is it different when you can be in your boxer shorts underneath if you want, but like you gotta it's about like it's about that respect, right? And that
Yeah.
how you show up to that. So those I make the mistake sometimes, Aaron, of not explaining credibility and reliability. And I'm just like, yeah, we all get that.
Yeah.
And a good number of like people on my courses just don't. So then the other two elements of the trust equation are what we really lean into, which So the other thing you need to be highly scored in is intimacy.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's hardly any of my clients that ever like understand this properly when we start the work, when we first get into it. If you're not like, if we talk about authenticity, because we've already talked about that, if you're not being your real self,
Mm.
then people are not going to get that trust in the same way. But what also comes with intimacy, and it's not about obviously going in and giving them a big hug or stroking their face or anything dumb like that. But what it is like, we've already talked about this, if you make a mistake, if you screw up the slide, if you say something wrong, if you don't know the answer to one of their questions,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
It really is okay, because all those moments where you're just natural and where you're real, people will trust you more. And I actually, like, there are a lot of cases in politics. Australia is one of the best countries for this to be a truth, actually, where people just are real and they're truthful and they say, well, I don't know, mate.
Yeah.
Those, those politicians get really highly trusted. And we had it in the UK with Boris Johnson.
Mm.
And, he was a prime minister for a long time, and lots of people have lots of issues with him, and he did lots of bad things for the country. When he was coming into power and all the way up, like when he was going for mayor and even before that, when it was more local, the he would often just say, I don't know the answer to that question. I can go and find out, but I don't know. And it built so much respect.
Yeah.
And so that intimacy is something that so many people forget because you're just trying to like show face.
Yeah.
But then the final thing in there is self-orientation. And it's the old phrase, put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
Because they might love your product, they might
Mm.
love the thing you're trying to sell, but they just can't be there until the next tax year. And no amount of pushing or like shoving or trying to convince or trying to inspire or trying to share ROI stories is actually going to get them across that line, because it just is a reality. They just don't have the money.
Yeah.
And if you don't bear all those things in mind respectfully, then you're more likely to lose them. Whereas if you respect it, they'll probably come back on the 1st of
Mm.
April.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about UK tax years, by the way, when I say April. But like, yeah, they'll probably come back, and so trust. That was a big long explanation to just say trust is what I would start with. It's because there's these four elements to trust. And if
Yeah.
you screw up one of them, you screwed up the trust, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And so the self-orientation part is interesting. I often talk about that from a self-interest point of view, certainly in leadership, that if you if you make decisions or even contemplate what's in it for you or what you're going to get as a result of this decision, that potentially breaks or diminishes trust more than anything else. You've got to maintain it's not about you, it's about the message, it's about them. You've got to have that genuine empathy and genuine care for the other person. So from a trust point of view, if you've got people that, okay, we get that, Mike, we get the fact that we've got to be credible, reliable. I've got to build intimacy, build the authenticity and stuff like that. But I'm under so much pressure to get this across the line. I've got to present next week, right? So how do I build a deck? How do I build a message? How do I influence? How do I literally ethically convince this group to actually do the things that I want them to do, but have it be their idea, dude?
Yeah. Um, Ask questions. So you've mentioned brilliantly the word curiosity like a bunch of times on this podcast already. Um, if you What happens a lot in like in sales, in feedback, in motivating teams is exactly what you just described, Darren. Like, I've got this thing, I've got this end goal. I just need you to do this thing. But again, like, you're not self-orientated, right? You're not
Yeah.
considered, well, you are, you're too highly self-orientated. We want to be low self-orientated so we understand other people's thoughts and opinions. And if you don't know how they feel about it, if you don't know what's important to them, there's only one way to find out, which is to
Mm.
ask questions.
Yeah.
And you might find yourself on a 30-minute call where you've got 10 team members and you're like, well, I can't ask them big open questions because there just isn't time. But if this is really important about getting this across the line, it might be important to find 10-minute one-on-ones with everybody.
Mm.
It doesn't necessarily even need to be about this, but it's just those kind of coffee machine chats. The
Yeah.
more you understand about what motivates them. So an example I can give you is what happens a lot in the workplace is, when there's a deadline, is people want to people stay late, or even if we're working from home, we work longer hours. But Susan has to finish at 3 every day because of childcare.
Mm.
She is single, doesn't have another option. And it's not that she actually is one of the most studious. She loves the work. She really is passionate about getting this across the line. It's not about her being lazy or about her, she just can't work after 3 o'clock. And so, like, if you don't understand those motivators and you're just saying, well, we've got to get these things done, you're going to lose Susan because she's just going to get pissed off, or she's going to get upset, or she's going to feel like disrespected or not part of the
Yeah.
team. And then it might be, you might have someone who's happy to work until midnight, but there are other factors that kind of influence them. So if you don't know those things about your team, if you don't know how they like to communicate, how they like to be communicated with, so a lot of people get angry about having videos off on a video call. A lot of leaders will get angry about that. And we know scientifically that more than 50% of communication is done through nonverbals. So
Yeah.
those leaders, their instinct is correct. They are losing a lot of communication, but there might be reasons that you don't know that really are leading this. Like that might be the person who, in old days where we all went into the office, that person might have phoned in sick because they're physically fine, but mentally they're not there. Whereas today, you've still got them. You might have
Mm.
a 30% version of them, but you've got more than if you'd invited them into the office.
Yeah.
And so, actually, like, understanding all of those things, what motivates them. So if we're talking about a presentation and trying to get those people to do the things that you want, understand what do they want to do?
Mm.
Because there might be some hybrid somewhere in the middle where you're like, okay, well, all right, it's now going to take us 3 days longer than the deadline that I had. But if I'm really honest, that deadline was just my deadline. It's not the
Yeah.
business deadline. And actually, we're going to get there at a much higher quality because we're going to allow Susan to finish at 3 and just take that extra 2 days, or whatever that whoever that might be. And it just gets missed a lot. And I know somebody who worked in one of the UK's leading agile organizations, and when financial pressures came under and redundancies had started to happen, and the KPIs were higher for the next year because it really mattered, a lot of that agility dropped away pretty fast.
Funny about that.
Yeah, because the managers and leaders were like, I don't really have time to hear about your weekend anymore. I just need you to crack on with building the thing. But it does matter. Like, does it, some like what does my wife say? My wife says this term, which is false deadlines.
False deadlines.
False deadlines. She talks about, like, so sometimes I'll say to her, like, oh, can we get that thing done before so and so comes to stay with us on Friday? She's like, it's a false deadline. Like, it doesn't actually need to be done before they get here. You just want it done before that. But she takes it from work because in workplaces, a lot of times a manager or a leader has decided on this deadline, but it doesn't really matter.
That's
Like, it
it.
doesn't actually matter if it's 3 days later. It's just because I need to tick it off my list and forget about it.
Yes.
Um, so that level of flexibility is really, really important.
It's when you're saying false deadlines, I was thinking of all the times when I had to try and get my sales team to get deals in or bring deals forward, particularly towards the end of the financial year, and call favors for customers. And I used to think to myself, you know what? The customers are still going to want to do business the day after the financial year. Why do we have to get it in now? It's such a falsehood. Fair income. But we had to try to ethically convince them to bring it forward, call on favors, and talk about trust. That often created a diminishment of trust
Yeah.
because the self-orientation was going up because we had to get the numbers.
Yeah.
And so the customers felt, well, is it really about this customer-centric value creation, or is it more about you getting your sales number?
And
Different.
that's an amazing story about, like, external, like, to your customers. Just like anyone who took something from Darren's story there, just apply that same thing internally, like, with your
Yeah.
team. Because if you create those false deadlines, you will lose the trust, you'll lose the motivation. So yeah, like, I know your question was more around like actual like tools and techniques of like what do you do in that presentation. We could definitely get into that, but it's if you don't figure out the trust and what motivates your team first, it
Yeah,
doesn't matter how great you are with your hand gestures or whether you do power stances on stage, because all that's going to fall by the wayside because you just haven't got them in the first place.
that's it. That's it. So this, I mean, this has been and I've got a couple other questions to ask you, but if people are listening to this and thinking, oh, just think it's preparation, it's trust, it's curiosity, it's being genuinely yourself. Now, Mike, I'd love to ask you this question around whether it be internal communication, internal pitching, external presentations, and stuff like that. Can you talk about the learning the scripts and when I'm going with this is I find a lot of people spend a lot of time focusing on what to say
Yeah.
rather than trying to understand what is the core message and relying on their conversational skill set to be able to convey that message authentically with genuine influence. The work that you do, how much of that is helping people learn their content, helping them to learn the process versus being able to express it in an authentic way with their own language, right? So with their own sort of flavor.
So if you're creating a pitch or a presentation, most people nowadays are going to use something like ChatGPT. You know, we've already do more presentations than we've ever had to do before, and so
Yeah,
it's a great, really great tool. Most of the time, somebody managed to fool me the other day for the first time, but most of the time I can tell within under 10 seconds that this is ChatGPT language. Um, Now, the person that fooled me the other day, it's actually because they obviously use ChatGPT enough and they program in enough things that it's learning how they speak.
right.
And so it can be a hugely useful tool if you want to do that. But if you are reading a word and you're like, I would never really use that word, I would use this other word instead. I would never really structure a sentence in that way. It
Yeah,
just doesn't sound like me. Then that's going to be much harder to learn or to memorize than if you just have something that is exactly how you would speak. Um, when it comes to the memorizing stuff, it is really important. It's really important. The best example I can give you is if you watch Obama, like ex-President Obama, do a speech
yeah,
versus pretty much any UK prime minister that has ever existed. The Obama, all right, fine. In the US, they've got these really fancy, like sort of glass teleprompters.
yeah.
Actually, if you watch Obama, he doesn't use them that often.
No.
Whereas what we had a quick story. So Rishi Sunak, who was our prime minister until a few months ago, he was trying to bring in this new law where like to help immigration where people were going to be sent to Rwanda. There was
Hmm.
a really like 500 million pound contract with Rwanda to take people to build houses and take immigrants that had landed here on our shores that supposedly we couldn't house anymore to go over there.
Yeah,
And nobody really wanted to take it up and the law wasn't passing. So he came on stage with a speech of like I'm your prime minister and this matters and this is happening. But he came on stage and he said, now, what's really important is I'm your prime minister. And it's really important that from what we've said is happening. And you're like, all the you forgot how you're looking down to read the word prime minister. You know you're the prime minister, right? And so, like, I mean, hey, listen, if anybody from British politics is watching this, like, call me because we like I work for free for a couple of hours. Like, there are so many quick fixes that they're just not doing, and and that story is so relevant. Like, we talk about politics, but it really matters in your boardroom. And if you don't feel confident in the language because ChatGPT wrote it, or if you
Mm,
don't feel confident in what you're saying next, and you're having to read the important you need to know your name. You
yeah.
need to know the mandate, that the thing that call to action, that thing that we really want to rouse everybody off. If you're reading any of that, you've lost us.
Yes.
Because if you can't even remember it, then why should we remember it?
Yeah.
So memorizing is really, 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 really important. And the best way that you can improve on that is don't just wait till you've got a thing to prepare for. Just try and knock out like 10, 15 minutes every week. Of just pick up a book and just see if you can memorize a passage.
Mm.
Like, and loads of people are going to think, oh, that's a great idea, and then not do it. And I would be
Yeah,
one of those people. But I can't explain to you enough how much that will help you because then what you're saying, Darren, is what really, really matters is everything that comes beyond
yeah,
those words. The words do matter. The way that you hold yourself, the non-verbal communication. So if
yeah,
I'm looking down at my notepad to remember that exact wording, you've lost a lot. You've lost a lot of connection with those people. So when in early days, if you've got to do a speech, if you're listening to this podcast, you've got to do one tomorrow, I would say write bullet points.
yeah.
Write bullet points that are reminders for you and then speak like you,
Mm.
please. Like even if you're speaking to the board,
Yeah.
don't try and assume how they want to be communicated with. You've got to be yourself
Mm.
and speak like, all right, look, if you're somebody that swears loads and you know you're meeting with somebody that's very religious and doesn't swear, consider that
Yeah,
because we've talked loads in this podcast already about your audience.
that's
So if
it.
you just decide, well, I swear all the time, so I'm going to carry on swearing, then you're like, well, now you're sort of being really disrespectful to this Christian person. Like I work a lot with Nigerians,
Okay.
and like a lot of Nigerians, not all, a lot of Nigerians have a strong Christian background.
Yeah.
And so if I go on and I'm saying the F word after 3 minutes, that psychological safety and that trust that I'm building with them is going to be impacted.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean just go in and bulldoze and just be like, no F's given. But at the same time, you just speak the way that you would naturally. And a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff will come with it. And the last thing I'll say on that is that there's a lot out there, a lot of bad stuff out there about hand gestures. There's a lot of things about like power hand gestures and making sure you use them and make sure you have different ways of using your hand gestures because if we just use one type of hand gesture, it gets boring. Here's the thing, and I really like I'm on a mission to change this. It's not about hand gestures. Hands are just an extension of the arm, which is an extension of the shoulder, which is an extension of probably viewers will have seen I use my hand gestures a lot
Yeah.
because for me, my body and my brain and my voice are all connected to each
Yeah.
other. So if I'm talking about something that really matters to me, I'm probably doing this.
Yeah.
I've, I came from an acting background. I'm a very like lovey feely person, so I probably have done something like that at some point on this podcast. I don't know, but it's connect your body with your voice. If we
Yeah.
just study a YouTube video that says use your hand gestures in these 5 different ways, you are disconnected from the words that you're saying.
Totally.
So yeah, so like I would say in that prep, don't get up in your own head too much.
Yeah.
Just go in and be yourself. You're the expert. If someone's asked you to give a presentation, it's because you're the expert on it and
Yeah.
they want to learn from you.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it just over time, get better at learning stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's really hard, if it's terrifying, if you do practice in 2 days' time and you're like, I hate Mike for suggesting this, that's great. Because the other side of that hate and that fear is
A
success.
breakthrough.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the thing I love with what you're talking about, Mike, is, and I want to make this really clear that you're not talking about remembering content so you can recite content. You're talking about understanding content, understanding your message so you can have a conversation and converse with that in an authentic way using the language that you normally use based on the audience you're having the conversation with. Because what I see far too many people do is they learn a pitch or they learn a presentation and they literally want to learn those words verbatim so that they're going to recite it. And the minute you're trying to focus on, you mentioned it just before, you want to get out of your head and into your heart because the communication is you've got to connect with your audience from a heart space, not from the head space. And the moment you forget something, all of a sudden you're in your head, and that's when you can actually tie yourself up in knots. So the preparation is key, but you've got to know your content. You've got to do the work to understand your content so that when you talk about that to anybody, you can talk about that. The message is the same, but the way you deliver it might be different each time you do it.
Can I share 2 quick tips on
Please.
when you're in a room or on a Zoom call? and you get just what you described, Darren. When you get into those moments where you're in your head, you can't get out of your head. This won't work for some people because they'll hate it when I describe it. It works for a lot of people. So just everyone give it a try. And if you're watching or listening, try it now. Don't move your head or move your eyes. Just carry on looking where you're looking, but see how far you can see to the left and the right.
Mm.
So for those who know what I'm talking about, this is peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is great when you're drunk, when you're stressed, when you're nervous. If you try to see how far you can go, it will sober you up a little bit, but it also in the room, it takes you out of your head a little bit.
Yeah.
It just what it does is it gives you more spatial awareness. So instead of that tunnel vision or those beer goggles that we call it, actually you're just a bit more like, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. And so in a stressful pitch or presentation, it just allows you to feel a little bit more grounded within that space.
Yeah. Love it.
And the other thing is, even if it goes badly, nobody died.
You said that very, very matter of fact. So what's the worst that can happen, right?
Like we see it like all the time. People we end up in organizations where things become crucial.
Yeah.
Nothing is crucial. Nothing is crucial in business. Like, yes, all right, things people might lose money and that might affect. Well, I mean, I say nothing is crucial. Someone's going to put a comment now, you're just giving me stories about what. So maybe yes. We build this idea of life and death in a business
Yeah.
that like just it puts so much stress on people that then you can't just go and like actually connect with other people. Like, you can't
Yeah.
just be yourself or like figure things out. So yeah, look, we're not doctors and we're not nurses. I mean, somebody might be listening to this who is a doctor, and then they might be like, well, somebody will die if I screw this up. But if we're in sales and you screw up a call, nobody died.
That's it.
And you just got to remember that, like, even on the worst days at work, it's okay.
It is. It is. So, mate, as we bring this to a close, is there any last bits of gold or advice you can leave somebody with that perhaps we haven't covered that you'd like to impart when it comes to pitching, preparing, influencing?
Um, I think when it comes to pitching and presenting, I would say watch yourself. So either like if you're allowed, some workplaces don't allow this, but if you're allowed to record your calls, watch them back.
Yeah.
If you're not allowed to, just jump on a call with a couple of friends or family members, or at least you can record on
Mm.
Zoom or other platforms when it's just you, and
Yep.
watch that stuff back, because the thing I described right at the beginning of this podcast, that gap, sometimes that gap is because you don't realize that when you're trying to be professional, you're playing the character that you spoke about earlier, Darren.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes people's sort of resting face within that comes across as quite angry.
Yeah.
And if you see that in yourself, you're like, oh, well, that's what's causing the gap. I'm trying to be passionate and like inspiring, whereas I'm coming across like I hate the people. Um, and so it's the big, and I say this, it's like saying, oh, when you go to the gym, make sure you do your stretches afterwards. I don't do my stretches afterwards, and I end up with pains because of it.
Yeah.
So the same way, I don't watch myself back nearly as much as I should. So I say that because I fail at this all the time. But any amount of watching yourself back will really, really help you improve, not just in your pictures and presentation, but in your general communication, because suddenly you're like, wow. So when I get passionate just in a conversation, that's what I look like. So yeah, that's the biggest tip I can give for people who want to improve their
That's awesome,
communication.
mate. And guess what? That also starts to elevate credibility because you become genuinely yourself.
Yeah.
How other people see you. Awesome. Mate, really love this conversation. For people who want to connect with you and learn more about what you do in terms of forefront coaching, where's the best place for them to reach out and connect?
So our website is forefront-coaching.com, or dash coaching.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so my name is Mike Lane Evans. I got married last year and double-barreled the name. It's a bad surname, and no one else in the world wanted it. So I'm literally the only Mike Lane Evans in the world that that's on LinkedIn anyway. So yeah, just search that and you'll find me. And The biggest thing for us is as of about 4 weeks ago. Well, it depends when this podcast goes out. As of sort of like early August, we've started putting a lot more content out on social media,
Yeah,
and um, the main reason for that is that we're really passionate that what we do is accessible for everybody, and if you can't afford it,
yeah,
or if you're too scared to get in a room with someone you don't know that well because
yeah,
you're not there yet, there's going to be loads of free content on LinkedIn and other social platforms to come soon as well. So just go get it for free and just
yeah.
you'll make small improvements just by using that. Even if you never send me an email or never check out our website, there'll be stuff there for you.
Love it, love it. So you and your wife have combined your two surnames, and you both got Lane Evans.
Yeah. So my I guess I was going to try and keep my wife's name a secret, but you can easily find it on Google. So she was Amy Lane. And all of her life, she was big into sport as a kid. And so all
Yeah,
of her life, she was always either Amy Lane as a full name, or she was Laney, or she was Lane. She's never been for any of her life really just Amy. So
yeah,
it's so part of her identity. She really didn't want to get rid of it. So I tried to be the kind of the modern man and say, well, I'll just take your name.
yeah.
About 3 months before the wedding, I was just like, I realized that so many of my clients knew me as Mike Evans, and so yeah, we said we would never double barrel, but we
Nice.
we did. So
Good on you, mate. Good on you. That's authenticity. That's being yourselves and expressing yourselves in your true self. So, good on you. That's awesome. Hey, thank you so much for spending some time on your Friday morning. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, my friend.
yeah, thanks for having me, Darren.
Cheers, mate. All the best. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.